Focus on pastoral support. Brought to you by Sight Loss Friendly Church from Torch Trust.
Welcome to the Focus On for this month. My name is Lynn Davis and I am the newest person to the SLFC team. Some of you might have come across me before, some of you may not. But yeah, I joined Torch Trust a few months ago and I'll be hosting this webinar on pastoral support. If you've got any questions to anything that I am talking about, feel free to type it in the chat, and there will be questions at the end. I might go for a questions break in the middle if I feel like, if there are loads of questions coming in. Matthew is taking care of the chat, so anything you want to ask, then feel free. When it comes to questions at the end, of course, Matthew and I are both totally blind, so we won't be able to see you waving your hand or raising your hand, so just say your name and your questions. So we can probably all agree that pastoral support is a very important part of any church work. And it's a great responsibility of the church to deliver pastoral support to all congregation members and visitors, including those with sight loss. And today we're going to look at how to most effectively meet the pastoral need of varying degrees of sight loss. So just to recap on what sight loss is, I'm sure most people are aware, anything that, so any sight that can't be corrected with glasses. So that means you can actually see quite a bit and then you can be totally blind, which is the other end of the spectrum. So you may find these hints and tips especially useful if you provide individual pastoral support, such as befriending, so either face-to-face or on the phone, or if you're in a small group as a home group or a Bible study. Yeah, if you lead a small group or a worship band, you're part of pastoral support, and offer individual contact in what would otherwise be a group setting, such as healing, prayer, or ministry during Sunday service. So, you know, the part where everyone gets up to pray during a service as well. Manage rotas for worship, reading, intercessors and prayers. Provide social events such as film nights and refreshments after the service. So a lot of these things that we'll be talking about have been discussed in other focus-ons in more depth, and some of them will be discussed in more depth. However, I'm just going to touch a little bit on each aspect here, so to sort of cover the main things of pastoral support. So before the service, a warm and proper welcome is even more important than a large print or braille service sheet, and those of course are very important, but of course a warm welcome is very determined of whether somebody returns to a church or not, and this is perhaps especially important for people with sight loss, because for somebody with sight loss, the welcome might be the first impression you get of the congregation, especially if you can't see and you don't have any perceptions on sort of the people that attend the church, and you kind of see whether they are your age, your socioeconomic group, etc., etc. So things to keep in mind when welcoming someone with sight loss. If they're a new person, just walk up to them and introduce themselves and ask any questions that you might ask any other newcomer, such as where they're traveling from, etc. But please avoid asking any sight loss related questions at this stage. If and when you get to know them, this will definitely come up in conversation, and yeah, it can be a bit affronting as well to ask someone about sight loss straight away. So ask if they require any help to finding a seat, where in the room they'd like to be placed. Someone with a bit of sight may want to sit in the front so they can clearly see the screen and whatever else is going on. And someone totally blind or someone with tunnel vision may not require this, but some of them might want to sit at the end of a row so they can get out easily. End seats are often desired for people with guide dogs because it's often more comfortable for the dog to lay down there at the end aisle. So if you're a sight loss friendly and aware church, Let them know if large print or braille service sheets and songbooks are available, and if they don't have such resources, that's fine. It might be a topic to discuss later, and at least it shows that you are willing to discuss such things, which is another part of a warm welcome. You may sit next to them during the service or introduce them to another person in the congregation who you know to be friendly and who would not mind letting the person know things like when to sit and stand or offer help during communion. So if a newcomer with sight loss is accompanied by a sighted person, wait for them to either introduce or dismiss the sighted person, because it could be a stranger or a taxi driver helping them to the door of the building. So if you're not sure whether someone has sight loss, but you've noticed something about the way they walk or lean in to look at something, or clearly not seen something that is evident for fully sighted people, just ask if they need something, or say that you've noticed that their sight has been affected in one way or another. It's important to be discreet about this though, as this could be someone new to sight loss who might not want to make it too widely known. So one thing you could say is, I don't know if you've seen this big notice board with the details of the church picnic. Are you interested in coming? So that way you kind of draw their attention to it without saying, well, you didn't see this. This is something wrong with your sight, kind of thing. So if it's a regular attendee, I guess, you know, it's pretty self-explanatory. Welcome them. Have you always welcomed them? Depending on how well you know them, you may not need to introduce yourself each time, but when in doubt, it's better to say who you are one time too many than to just assume that they know. I know I've had conversations with people where I'm not entirely sure who they are, and somebody else has come and said, who was that you were speaking to? And I was like, I don't know. So that's an awkward one. So yeah, it really doesn't hurt unless you know them so well that you just, you know that they know your voice from a mile away or your face from. So yeah, ask them if there's a particular person they might want to sit next to. Maybe they have a friend in the congregation they want to sit with, and then take them to their preferred seat if they have one. So during the service is the next part of this. So things to keep in mind during the service. So regardless of somebody with sight loss is a newcomer or regular attendee, it is very useful to have somebody sits with them during the service. And it's not just so that they should know when to sit or stand or how to take communion, but in case notices are read out which they take a particular interest in, if something else could be described like a video tool, a video clip or another tool used, like if you have like an all-age talk, as some churches do, that involves children and everyday objects like toys and things like that are being used, that could be useful to describe. Or sometimes if there isn't a song, they don't know a song or you don't have the lyrics, it could be useful for somebody standing next to them to whisper their lyrics. And it's not really ideal to do this, but it can definitely work as a short-term solution until their preferred format is available. So people with sight loss, even people who are totally blind from birth, can definitely benefit from descriptions before, during, or after a service, if it adds to the experience or if something is different to how it normally is. So for example, if the vicar is wearing a magnificent purple robe, or you have a service where Sunday school drawings of rainbows are hanging all over the church, for example, these things make nice differences. Most people who have sight loss, they have some memories of what things look like, and people who are born blind usually have their own ways of understanding abstract things like colors and clouds and rainbow that make sense to them. So yeah, don't worry about using things like that. And they are not even though they're very visual, they don't exclude anybody. If you notice somebody with sight loss getting their purse out when the collection is announced, you can either steer them toward the offering bucket when it comes to their seat by verbal description, or somehow communicate to the bearer that they shake it slightly so it can be clearly heard. And it's important to not physically help them unless you're being asked or you know them to want this. So how communion? Communion is an interesting one, isn't it? Because there are so many ways of doing communion that usually is very different from church to church, and all churches have their own ways, even within the same denomination. So don't expect anyone to just go with the flow. So the best ways to help during communion is when communion is announced, quietly describe how it's done. A very inclusive thing to do is for the pastor or the vicar to actually describe what is happening by embedding it in their talk. So, and as Mary is going around with the bread, and as we take a piece, let's reflect on what Jesus did for it while we eat. Then when Nick comes around with the wine, with the little wine cups, we're going to drink together. And of course, don't forget to announce when we are going to drink. So that can be done by actually talking about the wine being symbolism of how Jesus' blood was shed for us. Or if you want to be more straightforward, you could say, now we simply drink. And now we drink. And that is a way to kind of do that so that a person with sight loss doesn't feel like, oh, they are doing this especially for me, even if it might be especially for them, but then it doesn't feel that way, and it feels like you're going to less trouble in a sense from their point of view. So if you get up to receive communion, ask if they need guiding, and you can explain the process to them as you walk up. So details whether there are individual cups for the wine or whether they've dipped away for key things to include. If you kneel while taking communion, give some warning, as hitting your shins against the altar, I can speak from personal experience, is really, really, really painful. So after the service, so the service has now happened and it's time for refreshments. And refreshments are very important because, not just because they're delicious, but it is a good time to catch up with friends and get to know new people. However, for people with sight loss, especially if new to a church, this can be a time filled with insecurity and anxiety. And we've actually had quite a lot of questions to the SLFC inbox asking how we can ensure that refreshment time is as inclusive as possible. So some best practices could, for example, be as soon as the service finished, ask whether the person with sight loss is intending to stay for refreshments. And if to say yes, immediately ask if they like to sit at the table while you get them a drink. Getting drinks and food when you can't see very well or at all is not very practical for many reasons, but some people, and especially if people are new to sight loss, they might not want to come across as lazy or a burden, or they might not want to ask you to help them. So just helping sort of make sure that you really don't mind doing this. Some people are perfectly capable of helping themselves, but they will then tell you. Seat them at a table where there are people already sitting and introduce them before asking what drink they want. And yeah, when asking what drink they want, ask if they want milk or sugar or any cakes, if there are any. And the reason for introducing them is it's good for them to have the option of talking to someone while you're gone. Always let them know when you're back and where you've put the drink. You can simply say that you can do that by using the clock face to describe where the drink is, or just say in front of you and a little bit to the left, and then the person will find the drink. Just watch them while they find it. And if you can't stay with them for any reason, let them know and introduce them to people who might have arrived at the table before you go, or maybe ask if they like to talk to anyone, perhaps following an announcement from one of the notices. So another important part of service is leading, of church life is leading. And people with sight loss are, who has been part of a church for a long time especially, may, just like anyone, just like any other member, express an interest in becoming more active with the ministry, and such interest should be definitely encouraged. And any support needed should always be discussed. So there is no limits to what a person with sight loss can do. And just like anyone else, they're called to different parts of the ministry. So somebody might want to be in the worship team. Somebody might want to join the welcome team, refreshment team, or lead a home group. So we are going to talk more about the specific things about leading in a session in June, where we will go into more depth about like the different things that leading sort of entails, and see and give you more tips and tricks on that. But I think now, I think it's suffice to say that I think it's the important thing to keep in mind that somebody isn't going to ask to be an active part of something they don't know, right? Or something they are absolutely sure that they can't do. There could be a case where somebody would say, oh, I'm interested in this, but I'm not sure how to go about, for example, helping with a welcome team. That is when you have a discussion. Okay, what do you think? Like you could brainstorm with each other. But if somebody says, I want to be in the worship team, you just have to assume that, or lead a home group, you just have to assume they say that because they are absolutely 100% confident that they can do it. There might still be nerves because stepping up is a big thing for anyone, whether you have sight loss or not. So there might still be some kind of discussion or nurturing needed here. But I think the most important thing is to discuss how it's being done rather than can it be done. And that could be done in sort of a one-to-one setting where the person talks to the pastor and the vicar, or the vicar, or some church leaders. It could be a group of church leaders. Of course, that depends on how your church operates. Bible readings are also a very key part of the service, and people with sight loss can be asked to take an active part in a service by reading the reading for a particular day. It's a great way to include people in the service, and unless they can't, or because they don't have the reading the Bible in the right format, or they just won't because they're not confident yet, people with sight loss would be happy to take on this task. Absolutely, because it's good to be able to take that part. It's part of leading in a sense, but not in the sense that we were talking about earlier. A few things to keep in mind though is that ask the person to who you want to take part in the reading as far as possible in advance. When planning the service, it's a very good thing. So assuming that the person you ask, you know them quite well, because for someone to be asked to do a reading, especially someone with sight loss, I guess you would know them to a point. So you would know how they went about reading the Bible, because you might already have had all those conversations. And knowing them on that level probably means that they will be able to come to you with different needs, and they will tell you how they do it, and just check in. That's how I did with my pastor the first time. I told him, he asked me to do a reading. I said, I need to do it X, Y, Z. Is that okay with you? And he said, yes. But of course, when in doubt, do ask, which is really important. So somebody might also be very unsure about how to best read the Bible because they have never done it. And then again, that's something you can talk through together and sort of come to an agreement. And you might not ask them to do the whole reading. Maybe you can start with shorter readings and go on to longer readings. This is also individual. So how does a person with sight loss read the readings? So that obviously depends on what your level of sight loss is. So a person who is totally blind may use a braille display to read a reading, or they may have embossed a particular passage onto paper. Another solution is to read using a smartphone with voiceover and repeating what they hear. So headphones are used in this case, so the congregation can't hear the electronic robotic voice, and if the person's really good at this, it will sound like they're just reading very fluently and lovely. Someone who's partially sighted may use a Bible, a large print Bible, or a printout with a print in the appropriate size. I'm not going to mention print guides and all of that here, but that is something we do have different print sizes and stuff available. But yeah, they can either use that or a printout if just the passage is easier. They may also use a smartphone or a tablet because it's easier in that way to customize the size of the font as well. And just a little note on smartphones in churches. I know some people would feel a bit, the phones are everywhere. I lead worship and I use my smartphone, do readings, and I use my smartphone all the time. And it's something that has become a very common sight now from the part of my fellow congregation members. And I think it's just the thing where you know why they're using it, so it's just part of the service. It can be really helpful to be able to use a smartphone for so many things. So each church may have a preferred version of the Bible that they like to use, and a person with sight loss will probably comply with that. However, it is important to show understanding if they don't have an accessible version of a certain translation, and let them use what they have. But at Torch Trust, we do have different Bible translations, and for those who are using smartphones, the YouVersion Bible app offers a very comprehensive list of English translations as well as the Bible in other languages. So there are always ways to get around this as well. So one-to-ones. So one-to-ones can be maybe an important part of pastoral care, especially if somebody steps into a leadership role, but there could also be times somebody can benefit from a one-to-one, including Christian counseling and private prayers, to talk about anything that might not be easy for a particular person in a church context, including interpersonal relationships or making the service more accessible. Most churches have some formal procedures or informal practices for one-to-ones. Meeting someone alone can carry with it risks, both for the I was going to say the pastor, but like the one providing the pastoral support, and for the sight loss person with sight loss. But when there are established relationships in place, of course, then that's not a problem because you know the person well enough. When arranging one-to-ones with a visually impaired congregation member, it's fine to either do this online or on the phone, or in case a face-to-face meeting is desired or required, a neutral ground such as a cafe or a church building is fine. But this also needs to be steered a little bit as well by the person with sight loss, so the one who requires the one-to-one, for them to have a place that they can get to easily as well. So the next thing is home groups are very important. Home groups and Bible studies are not just great places to study scriptures, and but it's also, just like the refreshment, it's also a place to form friendships. But just like the refreshment times, home groups can be tricky to navigate with sight loss. If you ask someone with sight loss to join a home group, they may initially say no. This might be because the public transport isn't good in the evenings. They don't know how to get there otherwise, and taxis may be too expensive. They're anxious in new social settings, they're not sure whether they can follow the book or course that can be studied, they generally don't want to go. That could also be a reason. So that last one is fine, and it should be hopefully clear when that's the case. But if they are more hesitant about attending, it might be good to discuss what would make it possible for them to attend. In case of inadequate public transport, you could offer a lift, or you could ask someone else who would be in attendance who lives nearby to do so. The same person would not have to commit each week, and you could make like a rota, or yeah, even somebody could drop them there, or somebody could drop them home. When in someone's home, it's a very good idea to do the similar things that you would do in church to make somebody feel comfortable. So point out house rules that are evident to sighted people, such as whether shoes should be kept on or off, and where to put shoes and coats. Offer to show someone around the rooms they need so they can find their way independently. Most often these are the toilets, the kitchen, the living room, and the toilets. Offer to wait outside when someone goes to the toilets, especially if they don't know the house very well. Offer to help get any refreshments that are being served. So a house is far less chaotic than a church, but it's still tricky to carry drinks in an unfamiliar place, and serving from yourself from a communal plate when you have little or no sight without touching a lot of other food is quite impossible. And especially with hygiene being such a big thing in the pandemic, I think this is even more important than usual. But of course, yeah, that depends on the type of food and everything. Plan books and courses as well in advance. What are you going to be studying? And ask what particular format the person might need. You can always request torch for a book or a study or a course in a particular format. And we do have a very good relationship with publishers and can get the content within a space of a few weeks. But yeah, it's good to just know as soon as possible what you're going to study so that the person can follow along and then will feel equally included that way. Film nights, another fun and social activity that sometimes happens as part of church life, or even sometimes it could be a film that can take place in a service as part of a service. People with sight loss enjoy a good film as much as anyone else, and today there are loads of films out there with audio description, and with popular streaming services like Netflix, turning audio description on is easy, and many DVDs and Blu-ray also have this option enabled. I don't know if anyone uses DVDs anymore, probably not. It can be called English audio described, audio description English, or any variation on that. If audio description isn't available for a particular film, consider changing it for one that has it, or choose one where the audio speaks for itself. For example, most documentaries are very easy to follow without description. Audio descriptions can also be nice for sighted people because it frees up their eyes to do other things. I know sighted people who have been introduced to audio description who actually sometimes put it on when they do other things as well, so it doesn't have to be a nuisance. And I know we discuss quite a lot about like which language and terms to use, but watch a film is absolutely fine to say for somebody who has sight loss. Even though a totally blind person technically listens to a film, you would rarely have somebody say that I listened to a film. I mean, that's a kind of blind subculture humor that I'm not going to get into because yeah, so you would say watch a film, or like I would say that I watched something last night, or I watched some Daily Bread movies, and our Daily Bread movies felt like, yeah, videos is the word I wanted. Befriending. So this is a great way for someone with sight loss to get to know one person depending on their circumstances, and something that really could enhance their life in a good way, especially if they find it hard to go out or are lonely because they don't have many friends or relatives. So as a befriender, don't be afraid to express yourself how you would to a sighted person. And someone with sight loss, particularly someone who lost their sight later in life, may miss things like driving, watching the beautiful sunset, attend art exhibitions, or move around independently. But they're still happy to hear about other people doing these things, and sort of live their life through your experiences. And if you do any face-to-face befriending, you may do activities you both like, including things like 10-pin bowling, go to the cinema, or go for a walk. And it's just like with other people, you know, sight loss people, people with sight loss. I'm so used to using the term visually impaired people that the people with sight loss isn't quite embedded in my automatic speech pattern yet, so that's why I keep saying sight loss people, so you have to forgive me for that. Yeah, but people with sight loss are basically people, and whatever your taste is really going to define what activities you want to do. So there's no limit. I think as well here, the be led by the person is pretty much the thing that I would say. And then we have healing and revival prayers, or healing and revival. So this can be a very tricky topic, because for people with sight loss, those who are born with it or got it early in life are likely to be fine as they are. The sight is very much an academic concept to them, so I can attest for that because I'm one of these people. It's something that a lot of people have got. It's a sense that it does a lot for you. It's very practical, and all of that. But I don't know any difference, and I have no desire to be healed, and I think that is a very common thing for people who have had it since childhood. People who got sight loss later might feel differently, and they might also be grieving for the life that their full sight allowed them to live. But in either case, asking if they'd like to pray for God to heal them can cause upset. So best practice here is to let a person with sight loss be the one asking for prayers of this nature. It's also important not to presume that a healing prayer request for someone with sight loss relate to their sight loss. So always ask what they want healing for, because it could be like a migraine, a bad cold, an addiction to, I don't know, I was going to say makeup tutorials, but that because that was the first thing that popped into my head, but unhelpful YouTube videos or something. It could be anything, basically. Yeah, so let them ask. And I think what we always say in sight loss friendly church is think, ask, act. And I think that implies, that's a sort of thread that goes through the whole pastoral support thing. And as long as you act in that way or abide by those three, you are equipped to give excellent pastoral support to all congregation members, including the ones with sight loss. And that is everything that I have prepared. And I was wondering if there were any questions.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Lynn, for that. Please do put questions in the chat or use the raise hand facility and we'll come to them. There's one question in the chat from Cheryl. Hi, Cheryl. And this was back when we were talking about Bible readings, and she was asking if somebody wants to read a Bible reading in Braille, but they don't have a Braille Bible, can Torch provide the passage of Scripture in Braille so that they can read it? This is an interesting question. I would really like the answer to be yes. It sort of depends on the occasion. Sometimes we'll do it if it's for a big, a special occasion like a wedding or something, or a baptism, or it's an occasional thing. We probably would be able to do it. If you were asking us to do it regularly, we probably wouldn't be able to do quite that. However, it's worth pointing out that Torch does have an extensive lending library, which includes various Braille Bibles, and you don't have to necessarily borrow the whole thing. So if you know that you're doing a reading from 2 Corinthians, you could just ask in the library if you could borrow 2 Corinthians in Braille, and then obviously you'd have the whole of 2 Corinthians, which isn't quite what you want, but it would have that passage in it, and so you'd be able to access it that way. So there are definitely ways in which we can support you, even if it's not quite in the way that you'd like us to. So drop us a line if that comes up, and we'd definitely be able to work with you to find a solution.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
I have a question. It's Patricia speaking.
Hi, Patricia.
You said about having Bibles in other languages. Considering Ukraine is very much on our hearts at the moment, do you cover Ukraine?
So I think it depends on, I don't know whether, I don't think Torch Trust, and I'm speaking as a very new member of staff, so I think the Bibles that we provide, Matthew, they're in English, aren't they? So the Bible passages and scriptures. But if somebody was able to use a smartphone, the U version app lists a lot of languages. So like I'm Norwegian, for example, and then I have a Norwegian version of the Bible and I have an English version of the Bible. So there might well be Ukrainian. I know they have, I don't know how many languages they got. I think it's like 26 different languages now. So that's a good one. But in terms of getting Ukrainian Bible scriptures in Braille or in large print, I suppose in large print, it's about looking them up online. In Braille, it's a bit trickier, but there are definitely ways around it. But it's a sort of, at the moment, it's not something we can really support with.
Thank you. Can I ask another question? As no one else has put their hands up as far as.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I have just done a study from the House series. John Houghton was one of the teaching programs. And it was on Mary. You say you can get contents done in different publications, or you already have some in your library. How do you go about it when we know? Because I run a ladies group, and I've got 2 people. One's visually impaired, one's blind. How soon and how do I know if you've got it already, or can you help me in this, please?
Yes, I can. Yes, hi, Ellen. I'll take this if you like. This is one of the questions.
It's one of your areas of expertise more than mine, isn't it? So
yeah. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question. The first thing I'd say is please prepare as far ahead in advance as you can, as possible, because it really, really does help. If you know 3 or 4 months in advance that you're going to be doing something in 3 or 4 months' time, please ask us for it straight away. Don't hang back. I think there are various ways in which you can do it. The website's being overhauled, so you'll be able to see the catalogue on the website and things like that. But honestly, the best thing you can do is either send us an email or give us a ring and just say, be as specific as you can. So, don't say, have you got any York courses? Because we'll say, yes, we have, and we'll give you a list of about 20 of them. Please be as specific as you can, but just ask if we've got something. If you've got an ISBN number, that really helps, because we can drill down by ISBN really quickly. And it's particularly helpful, actually, if we haven't got it, because if we've got an ISBN, we can then go to the publisher and say, look, we need a copy of this particular ISBN. How quickly can you get it to us? The publishers will normally respond quite quickly, within a matter of days, and either send us the files or tell us how many weeks it's going to take to get the files, and then obviously we'll be able to do it. So, on average, if we haven't got something in the catalogue, we're probably looking at about 6 to 8 weeks, but that depends on how busy we are and how busy the publisher is, and, it could take 3 or 4 months, but it doesn't normally take that long. But yeah, the more prepared you are, the better, I think.
Thank you very much.
I'd just like to make a comment, actually. My name's Wendy.
Wendy.
Hi, I'm sort of coming at this from the other side of the fence because I'm actually a church leader who has very little sight. And I find the best way of doing it is just to be totally honest with people. Don't say you can do something until you've tried it, because you might or you might not be able to. But I just find that you just say, people now say to me, we'll do this and this, how much of it can you do? And I think if you're totally honest, so I think sometimes to look, maybe weaker than the people you're leading and teaching is no bad thing. And the people that I pastor to are amazing, and they really do look after me.
That's amazing, and that's so humbling as well, probably for them. And also it takes a great deal of strength and courage to actually be that honest and say, look, I can't do this, but you guys can do it, and I would be happy for you to help me, because ultimately I guess that's what it is, isn't it? So thanks for that comment, Wendy. That's very, very good reflection there.
It's Patricia again. Can I make a comment and get some suggestions from folk regarding this, the situation that we've been in the church?
Sure.
A chap who's completely blind wanted to work in the kitchen. Now, obviously, with kitchen, it's safety and protection issues for everybody, not just for themselves. And he loved to serve teas and coffees, and fill the dishwasher if he could, and things like that. And we initially allowed him to do it because we'd never come across someone wanting to do that in the kitchen before. But we found, to our astonishment, that it was really dangerous because, firstly, the floor was getting very, very wet and people were sliding on. He wasn't aware of this, but people were sliding on the floor. And secondly, he was losing grip in the sense of obviously knowing where a cup was with the hot water and all that sort of thing. Can anyone suggest what one can do to encourage these people to think or look elsewhere? Because I personally feel that is one place in the church that is a difficult issue.
Right. So the first thing to do, I suppose, and I don't obviously have a definitive answer, actually before I comment, does anyone else have any comments on this or any thoughts on this?
Anybody?
I do. Barbara again.
Yeah.
I have got a very little sight, and I personally would not offer to pour tea or coffee or any of that, because I know I'm not very good at judging heights and such. However, I would be perfectly capable of going in the kitchen and doing the washing up, doing drying up, whereas you're not causing danger to anyone else, because you can tell by feel whether something's clean or not. You can put your hand out, you know where the things are. And so a person with visual impairment can certainly do the washing up, can certainly wipe up, dry up. And I think that because in a person's home, they're doing these things in their own house. So, why should they be deprived of doing that in God's house?
Yeah, I think you touched on something very good there, Barbara, because I was just going to say something similar, that there are always loads of things to do in each, so that there are loads of aspects to do with each type of active ministry or active part of church life that you can get into. So Refreshment has the washing up. There's also the putting cups on a table. I don't know how it is, but in your church, but in my church we have all the teacups and all the refreshments, if you like, they're on one table. And that is another thing that can be done as well. So he could help put out the cups when they are still empty, and just making sure, put out the milk, the tea, the coffee, all the different things. So maybe suggest that he could do certain parts of the refreshment, but maybe stay away from other parts as it could be dangerous, or I don't know if I like the word dangerous, but you understand what I mean.
I would maybe add in any situation in church, there's always a risk assessment done these days. So if someone is asking to do a job, it should be, everybody needs risk assessed. So I don't think there's anything unusual about that. And then it means that everything is covered.
Yeah, thank you. That's a good point.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to have a question or want to share a reflection or a comment on anything?
Someone here from Windsor, Belfast, who I've just been having a chat conversation with about accessible publications. And I won't rehash the whole chat conversation, but I do just think it's worth making the point publicly that we talked about a catalogue earlier on. Once something's in the catalogue, so once we've transcribed something for one person, it goes into the catalogue for everybody. So if it's not in the catalogue, please, please, please don't be shy about requesting it. It really, really does help if we get a request in for a book that we haven't got, because that will not just help you, but it will help everybody else. And I just figured it was worth bringing that point up. All
right, so I guess that's the end of the Focus On session. I hope some of this has been useful. I thank you so much for attending today's Focus On session, and thank you for being a great audience for my first ever Focus On session. So I can only go strength to strength from here, really. So I hope you have a nice rest of your day, and we'll see you at another event, or indeed for the next Focus On.
To find out more about Sight Loss Friendly Church, please get in touch. Telephone 01858 438 260. Email slfc@torchtrust.org, or visit our website sightlossfriendlychurch.org.uk. Sight Loss Friendly Church from Torch Trust.